Hello, team, and welcome to episode 14 of Genre Blender, the podcast that celebrates all things storytelling. My name is Kris.
And I'm Ryan, and the topic for this episode is the personal Canon book tag, originally created by Taylor over at Made Between the Pages on YouTube. We'll have a link to the channel and the actual book tag as well in the show notes. But since this is your more your area of expertise, Kris, I'll let you sort of introduce this one if you like a little bit more.
Yeah, well, look, we've amended it for the podcast, so I've actually done the book tag over on my channel. It's an interesting one where you look at different periods of your life, and so the book tag initially was to look at three books from each time period in your life, so starting at early childhood right through to adulthood, and pick things that meant something to you, and I guess share why. Why it's shaped the way that you are today. So for the podcast, we've changed it a little bit because we do rewatch play and things like that, and we talk about more than just books. So we are looking at doing three things. So either books, games, or like a show or movie. And it was really hard to stick to like one thing from each time period. And there is one. I'll give you forewarning where I couldn't do
Oh, same.
just
I
one thing.
cheated.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're both the cheaters. That's great.
Yep.
So yeah, that's basically the way that we're going to amend it for today. But really fun tag. I'd love to see more people do it out on the internet because it gives you a good insight into, I guess, the person on the other end of the screen. I had to film it twice because I like trauma dumped the first time, and I was like, no one needs that in their life. So, I'll
Yeah,
aim not to do
it was
that
a
today.
full on trip down memory lane.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it really was. So yeah, I can totally get that. Very cool. So we'll get into that. It's probably going to be a little bit of a longer episode as well because we're probably going to get into some
Yeah,
really
we didn't share it with
interesting.
each other, did we?
No,
So you
yeah,
don't
it's
know
always a
mine and I
surprise.
don't know yours.
Mhm.
I really hope you get a kick out of one of mine because I lost it yesterday when I put it down and I was making the notes for it. So
Nice,
that'd be good. Do we want to
nice.
start with a rewatch play update though?
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of an update. I have a couple things to mention. Firstly, just that I finally finished Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer. So that was our our buddy
What's the
read
buddy
for
read? Yeah.
January. Yeah. So we won't talk about it here. I will save my thoughts because we'll actually have a discussion as a separate video. So it'll be up on the YouTube channel. It'll be a sort of a YouTube only type situation, but that'll be up there probably next week. But we'll have that. So I'll save everything. We won't talk about that one now. But I also did read Nemesis Games, which is the fifth book in the Expanse series. So
I just
between
thought I
last
saw that.
episode,
That you did
yeah,
that. Yeah.
finally. But so between last episode and now, in that 2 weeks, I started and finished a book, which is amazing for me. So I'm quite happy with that. But it was great. I loved it. It was probably one of the better ones in the series, and I'm right back in there for that one. It's super fun. So yeah, I'm gonna read. I'll probably save the rest for after I get back from Japan, because I have. I don't know if you can see it. It's like over here. I've got Exodus.
That doorstop that you've got there
Yeah,
on your
that,
desk. Yeah.
literally. Yeah, it's a giant brick. I've got that to read first, so we'll see. But
I'm gonna
yeah,
try and
it
get
was
that
good.
in before
Yep, that's my February read. Hopefully, fingers
thoughts and
crossed.
prayers to you.
Thank you.
Get that
Gonna need
done.
it. But yeah, that's it for me. Really, I didn't really watch anything or play anything significant this week. So yeah, how about you?
I finished this morning The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper, which is a historical fiction book. It's the second book in the series called The Wolf Den, and it's following started off as a prostitute in a brothel in Pompeii, and sort of something happens at the end of the first book, and I don't want to give too much away, but in the second book we are following her with a patron as a concubine. And just Elodie Harper has this way of like the story is so fucking brutal for this woman and her life, and you really are just sitting in her life and some of these devastating like decisions that she has to make for survival. And it really is this tale of survival from this woman, just from one POV and the things that she has to do. But Elodie Harper's writing is so beautiful and like poetic, and it's a real interesting mix. Because I listened to it this time. I did the first one physically, and I did the audio for the second book, and hearing just that lyrical prose while talking about this really just this woman's life, which is not pretty. Like it's so brutal. Yeah, I loved it. Ended up being a 5 star. I don't binge
Wow.
read, but I've downloaded the third book, so I will probably finish that before the end of the month. And I finally finished Dust of Dreams by Malazan, which I feel like I've been reading for months at this
I
point.
think you have. Yeah, I saw your update. I was like, yay,
I
finally.
was, you know what? I need a break. before
Fair.
before the 10th and final book in that initial series. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I did start playing No Man's Sky with a friend of mine.
Oh, cool.
And it's very pretty. It's one of those games where there isn't really a storyline, right? So you're just exploring and doing things. So we basically only got to the point we started building little like space houses so we could get out of the storms. And we're
Space
like
houses.
we're like 4 hours in, so I don't know.
Nice.
But it's been fun. Like I wouldn't play it by myself, but playing it with someone and just
Yeah.
sort of chatting while doing things is yeah, it's been good. But that's pretty much it for
Space
me. I
houses.
haven't watched anything new. I'm still going on The Resident, and I've got 5 episodes to go. So hopefully, by the next time
Nice.
we do one of these, we will have finished The Resident, which has been going on since July last year to do. So,
It's
but then
fun.
Rachel and I will pick another show to watch together, and that will be horrifically slow. So we are talking about potentially Buffy because neither of us have watched it the
Oh,
whole way
wow.
through. I've only watched like 4 episodes of Buffy ever, so potentially that's on the cards.
That's cool. It's funny. I actually own the DVD box set from like years ago, like decades ago, probably at this point. And I've never watched it all the way through either. I only ever watched a few episodes here and there. So there's like storylines that I don't even remember,
Yeah.
like what happened. But yeah, I tried. I watched the first season. I did watch that. And it was it's
I,
dated, but
I
it's
didn't
good.
even get that far. I got to think episode 4 where someone's a praying mantis and like someone's head had to
So
come off in the school, and that's all I remember. Like,
it's
okay.
perfect.
Except the guy who plays Xander shat me. So it's like I'm pretty sure it's like a douche hat in real
Yeah.
life as well. So
Well, he plays the role really
yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
amazing. All right, let's get into it because I think we're going to be here a while.
We will, yeah. So the way that this tag works is that so there's 6 time periods. One, two, three, four, five, six. There is 6 time
Yep.
periods. So we start with early childhood. So that's basically earliest memories. Like when can you remember doing any of this stuff? And I think Ryan and I each have 3 things to talk about. So we'll start off with early childhood, which is earliest memories that you can remember. And I'll get you to go first.
Okay, are we going to do this like
No.
round robin style, or are we going to alternate who starts first for each
Yeah.
one? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll figure
Okay.
it out as we go. Whatever works. We don't
Okay.
plan
All right.
anything here.
No planning. What's that mean? Okay. So, all right. So the first category is so early childhood, which is earliest you can remember, and there was this book that we had called House Mouse. It was like a cardboard book, one of those thick ones that kids can't mess up and tear the pages and hurt themselves. And anyway, so I loved this book apparently, and I remember this book, or at least I remember the illustrations, right? And I would read this book, and I would have it read to me, and my parents actually have a tape recording of me reading it, like mumbo jumbo, and then saying the words house mouse, and anyway, it's a whole thing. And we all have this like collective memory of this book. But essentially, I went looking for this book for part of this, to find out if we could link to it, that kind of thing. Could not find any trace of it, like none. It just did not exist. Looked and looked. Anyway, I got Steph, my partner Steph, to have a little bit of a look, and she found it. And it's written and illustrated by a guy called Mike Higgs. He's a British cartoonist. But there's still no trace of this actual book. There's the other ones. There's like House Mouse in the garden and House Mouse goes shopping and this and that. But there's no like original book. So I can't link to it because it's not anywhere. And we have looked. But yeah, House Mouse was the book of choice
That's
apparently
so
that I
cute.
absolutely adored. And yeah, the illustrations are cool though. So I'll see if I can link to those in the show notes. But yeah, anyway, we sort of found it. So
Yeah.
so it does exist. I'm wondering if I've got a photo of me reading it. Maybe I need to go sift through those. But
You
anyway.
zoom right in and like the pixelated
Yeah.
photos from the 80s and 90s. Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
there it is.
Yeah, got that.
Yep, cool. So that's my book. Film for me. So this was look. I'm aging myself here, but this is we're talking about 80s and very early 90s, right? My favorite one that I would probably put on and watch the most often, and I'm actually curious if you remember this one. Pippi Longstocking. It's actually the New Adventures of Pippi Longstocking. No? Okay, all right.
Not my
I'll
era.
link to this one, and you're gonna love this one. Originally it is a book that it's based on by a Swedish author called Astrid Lindgren, and this new version was a Swedish, German, American collaboration it was like a remake of it. And it's basically about, actually, no, I've got the blurb here. I'm going to read you the blurb because you're going to love this, right? It's short.
Heavens.
All right, cool. Pippi Longstocking, who travels on the ship Hop Toad with her sailor father Ephraim, encounters a sudden storm caused by a volcanic eruption. After Ephraim disappears into the sea, Pippi travels to the small coastal town of Roxby, accompanied by her horse, Alfonso, and monkey, Mr. Nilsson. She takes up residence at her father's house, Villa Villacula, which the neighborhood children believe is haunted. And then adventure ensues, and it's a whole thing.
That was a mouthful. Even from this end, I wasn't even speaking about it.
I loved it. It was great. It's this. There's a little bit of a theme that we'll see as we go through this. That was actually kind of interesting to me and insightful to me because I didn't really realize this until now. But I kind of had this little bit of a not obsession, but an interest, I guess, in like misfit characters or outcasts and rebels, underdogs. I think this is where it all started, to be honest.
That's what this whole tag is about.
Yep. It's all educational. So anyway, but I have not rewatched this movie, and I won't because the version in my head is probably going to be as good as it gets.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, I've got a couple of those on this list where I'm like, I won't watch it again. Like,
and it looks good. I would love to watch it again. It looks really like it's probably held up pretty well, but I won't do it. So anyway, if you remember that movie, I'm very curious. Do let me know.
I remember my mum having like a Pippi Longstockings doll in one of the
Really?
grandparents' house. Yeah, but
With the red hair, red pigtails.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. Nice. And then last but not least is a game that I actually didn't own. It was my cousin's game, so whenever I went to his house, I would play it. And it was on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES. And the game is called Totally Rad.
I don't remember that one. Sounds
It's
totally
probably-
rad.
It is. I'm going to link to there's a playthrough. It's only like a 20-minute playthrough from beginning to end of this game, so it's not a very long game. But it was a side-scrolling adventure game, like action adventure. And I think there was magic involved, and you were basically this. It had a very 80s vibe. The soundtrack is phenomenal. Like, it still holds up. It's great.
How much of that is nostalgia and how much is actually good?
It's good though. Like it's like if somebody was to make an 80s vibe type of game today, this is what it would look like. It's that good. And yeah, you basically fight bosses and stuff, and yeah, it's super colorful. The box art looks cool. But yeah, I think I think my cousin's house, they had a flood and I think they lost a bunch of stuff. So I think that was one of the things they lost, which is a shame. But I've seen it in like retro gaming stores. I've been very tempted to pick it up, but I don't own a NES, so I couldn't play it.
I mean, does that even matter? We had the Buffy box
Not
set.
really.
I'm like, yeah.
That's true.
It's really funny the things that you remember because mine are because it's going to be interesting because there is an age difference between us and like we don't feel it, but in things like this, it's like I was 5 years younger, so mine are going to be completely until we get to more sort of adult ages. So I've done this tag to preface this before, so I've tried to pick all new answers for this. So like finding another thing from my childhood that wasn't mentioned in that one that I've done on my channel. So my book I could not find. I remember it very vividly, and my grandma had a series of these little books about dinosaurs, not the ones that you were talking about. But I also remember quite vividly The Magic Pudding by Norman Lindsay, I want to say.
I know this one. Yes.
And I don't remember the story in its entirety because I was too young to read it, but I remember wanting it to be read to me. And there was a cartoon that was made of it as well. And all I remember is there was a koala and they were traveling around with this pudding bowl, and every time you ate the pudding, it would regenerate. So the magic pudding just would never end. And I was like, that sounds great. Unlimited dessert. Why wouldn't anyone want that? So I remember that as a kid quite fondly. And yeah, I also like, I mean, there are other books in that a similar vein where I was too young to read it, but I enjoyed having them read to me. But yeah, I remember the magic pudding and being frustrated. Like,
I'm just looking it up. The illustrations look so good. Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't read it, and my brain couldn't comprehend it. I was like, "Why can't I read it? That's bullshit."
Kid logic.
Yeah, but my show was Barney and Friends.
Oh, nice.
I was a Barney
Nice. My cousins
kid.
were into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You watch it nowadays, and it's so cringy. Like, and because they've tried to age it as well with the new generations of kids that have come in. But I'm talking like OG creepy dude in a purple dinosaur suit.
Yep.
Was very clearly
100%.
a human. But that was fun. And then like because of the age difference between my sister and myself, she she had like the new cast of characters. With Barney, there was like a yellow dinosaur that came into it at some point. Like she got that, and I was like, I don't care about fucking Daisy or whatever you're talking about. That is not the Barney that I know.
They don't exist to
That doesn't
me.
exist to me. I'm like the Barney in the four kids that was dancing around a maypole. I don't know. That's what I remember from Barney. Um, the game for me has probably got the most nostalgia here and like the most vivid memories, and it's Toe Jam and Earl that was on the Sega
Oh,
Mega Drive
nice.
or the Sega Genesis, and they're two alien rappers that have come to Earth from the planet Funktron, and
Funktron.
I just remember that when I was sick as a kid, we had a Sega Mega Drive, and like I would get it every time from the video store. It didn't matter how many times I played it,
Oh yeah.
I would get it every single time, and you never saved the game. So I just played like the first two levels over and over and over again. But I remember I was quite young, and I have a scar underneath my chin, so it was on the monkey bars, and I dropped. And I thought my grandpa was underneath me, but he wasn't. And I slashed my chin open on the metal underneath it. Australian playgrounds are not safe, or at least they weren't in the 90s.
Yeah, they are.
Like,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I needed like 6 or 7 stitches, and I remember everyone
Wow.
like holding me down, and then like the promise of Toe Jam and Earl was like there to like shut the fuck up, kid, stop screaming, and we'll get you Toe Jam and Earl. I was like, fine,
Amazing.
I could do that. But
That's really
yeah, I
good.
remember
Yeah.
that being the go-to game when I was a kid because I hurt myself quite shortly after that as well, and got Toe Jam and Earl. So
This is a
that's
recurring
yeah.
theme in your childhood.
But yeah, they were the earliest ones.
You remember, like, this is stuff that was in your memories, or
Mm.
did you, like, were you prompted by, like, finding stuff, or did you just think of it because it was in your head?
No, well, sorry, I thought of Barney and Toe Jam and Earl like very vividly. The magic pudding was prompted by looking for this book that I couldn't find.
Yeah, nice.
But
Cool.
everything else I remember quite clearly from early childhood onwards. So I guess what is your definition of childhood? Because I just went with like early primary school for this.
I just wrote like whatever you put in
Okay.
the notes. I just use that. Okay, so I think for this one I've got a book, a game, and a TV show. But I've actually got two books. One's an honorable mention, so I won't go too
There we
much
go.
into it.
There's the caveat.
That's yeah. Look, I cheated a few times. I'll admit that
I've only got
freely.
one. Yeah. All right.
So the first one, well, I'll say that I guess it's not really. I've done this the other way around. This is not the honorable mention, but this is the one that I remember the most. It's not really one book; it's a series of books. Goosebumps, the Goosebumps
I
books.
share that in my last tag, so I can't do it. Oh, did I?
Hey.
I don't know, but I definitely remember the Goosebumps era.
Nice, nice. Yep, Goosebumps, R.L. Stein. Um, I had pretty much all of them. I think I can't. I'm so sad that I got rid of them. There was a point in my like late childhood that my parents were just like, "Do you want these still?" Because I wasn't reading them anymore, and I was like, "Nah, just get rid of them. I don't need them." I would so love to have those still. Those covers are just something else.
Some of those stories were wild to read as a kid, though.
Yeah,
Like, that
yeah.
was pushing the boundaries of what children should be privy to.
Pretty almost, yeah. It was pretty cool, and it's funny because like your parents aren't going to read them first and
No.
vet them. Like, maybe some people's parents did, but I'm
Here's this
pretty
pretty
sure that
book with blood on it. That's for you.
yeah. And some of the covers were like,
Yeah.
ooh, that's interesting. So I'm going to read just like there's one, two, three, six titles. I'm going to go into it. Everyone knows what these are, but I'm just going to read the titles because they're just like some of my favorite ones. There was Ghost Beach, The Haunted Mask, Stay Out of the Basement. I think that's the one I remember the most. Oh, and Night of the Living Dummy. And a lot of these are just like direct rip-offs, but you know, they worked. One Day at Horrorland and Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, which I remember very vividly because I was in like I think we were on a road trip and I was listening to music at the same time and it was just kind of like anyway, it's in my head now.
I was trying to. Okay, so there was one that I loved, and it was an orange cover, and it had like sneakers on the cover, and I cannot remember the title for the life of me. I think it was book 8 in the series. Don't ask me why I remember that. But I also remember the first one, The Dead House, which was book 1, and I love the first one as well. That's
Yeah,
interesting
cool.
that you picked a couple of titles out that you really
I
enjoyed.
had a look. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of websites that have like all of them and they've rated all the covers and stuff. So I actually got to see all the covers again. It was quite cool.
That's such a
So we'll
trip
link that.
down memory lane. I
Yeah.
have to keep talking. I have to know what that book is.
Okay, you can look it up. So that's the main one. But then my honorable mention is there was a series of books called Naughty Stories for Good Boys and Girls.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard of
So the
it.
author is Christopher Milne, who's an Australian author, and I think did a bunch of Episodes of like Neighbours and stuff as well. He was a television writer, and I think he starred in some of them as well. There was 13 of these apparently, and there's a whole collection now with like every single book. I fucking loved these as a kid. I could not get enough because they were just like my kind of naughty kind of humor, and things that you wouldn't do as a kid, but that you could read about other kids doing, and that's okay. So there was the boy who said too many rude words. These aren't in any order, but they're just funny titles. The girl who blew up her brother, and Father Christmas cracks a wobbly.
That's
Can't get much more
amazing.
Aussie than that.
No.
So good. So that's the books. Now, what do I have next? Games. Games for me, there's a whole bunch that I could have chosen, most of them being on the SNES, the Super NES. But the ones that I chose were the Donkey Kong Country games, all three of them.
Yeah, yeah, they were good.
And mostly because my memories of those are because my nan and granddad had a SNES as well. We did as well, and we would go over their house a lot. And basically, it was like one of us would play it and then pass the controller to the next person, and then they would get out
Yeah,
and pass the controller.
that
And
was
that was like
multiplayer back in the day.
that was multiplayer,
Yeah.
exactly. And my nan would play. Like my nan was a gamer, and my mum was a gamer, and my aunties, we all played, and it was like that's was part of my childhood. It was a huge part of my childhood, and I will never forget the minecart levels and just how much fun we were just laughing, just constantly just cracking up at those. So anyway, that was a huge memory for me. So loved those games. And then TV wise, curious if you share this one at all, Mr. Bean.
No. Ironically, Lily, my sister, loved Mr. Bean. I was not a
Really?
Mr. Bean
You
person.
weren't,
No.
yeah. That's funny because I still laugh at it today, but like my humor has obviously changed, from when I was a kid. But I just can't get enough. Like even now, I still crack up at it.
And there
But
was an
yeah, they
episode
were
with like the
great.
lettuce in the sock, and he's like making a sandwich or something. He's like swinging lettuce
Yep,
around. I remember that quite
yep,
vividly
yep.
because,
That was
yeah, my sister would watch it with my grandma. That was how they
nice,
bonded. Well, there's not that many
nice.
episodes, is there?
In the actual series, there wasn't. There was only like I think 15, if that. And then there was a bunch of other like specials, and there was a
Yeah,
holiday
a couple
special, and there was
movies and
films
stuff.
and
Yeah.
stuff. But I think it's the trouble with Mr. Bean is the episode that you referred to because that's the one where it blew up and it was international. After that, and that's the one where he sleeps through the alarms and then he has to like
Yeah, yeah,
put on his clothes
yeah.
and brush his teeth in the car on the way to the dentist while he's driving. And then there's like the picnic at the end, and then all of that, the wasp incident. So I don't know if you
Oh, I
remember
remember
those,
the
but that
wasp
was
incident. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so good. And then the other episode I loved was the maths test one where he's just like
Oh,
trying to
yeah.
copy. Yeah,
I feel
the
like
one
there's
that's a meme
memes
now.
over. Yes,
Yeah,
there are memes everywhere. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll start with my show because in a similar vein, my sister was Mr. Bean with my grandparents, and my parents had me very young, wasn't planned, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, sort of while being raised, and there was one that I was pretty sure my grandma was going to throw out with the amount that I asked to watch this movie. This was back in the VHS tapes day when you had to like tape it and rewind it, and I would be like, again, every time. I was over there like every Tuesday
And
afternoon.
it takes time to rewind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was Homeward Bound, Lost in San Francisco. So it was the second
Oh
one.
yes,
And I
yes.
was obsessed. Like I've always been a dog person. I know not everyone is, but I was obsessed with the second one. I love the first one.
Yeah,
And it's probably one of the ones that made me cry a lot when like the golden retriever comes in at the end and Peter's like, oh my god, you made it. Anyway, the
yeah.
second one, bunch of dogs get lost in San Francisco and they like have their own apartment building, and I was like, this is amazing. Dogs in apartments. What more could you
Yeah.
want? And likewise Beethoven, like as an honorable mention
Hmm.
there, like both very dog heavy movies.
There were
But
a lot of dog movies in the back in the day.
yeah, but I would every time she'd have it ready to go. She'd be like, whatever,
Nice.
press play. Here's your biscuit, shut up. Um, Sit there and watch it over and over again. So yeah, that was a good one. Um,
Amazing.
my book is also a series because I feel like a lot of us, especially reading sci-fi and fantasy, like we like series and we're always going to gravitate towards it. Now I will say, don't agree with the author as of it. It's not what you think it is. He has done some questionable shit in recent years, so
Who hasn't these days?
I know everyone's an asshole these days. But the series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket was my. That is what I can remember from primary school
Nice.
because I remember being at bookshops when they existed, like lining up for them and like
Yeah,
waiting for the
cool.
next one in the series. And I didn't have great friendships in primary school. Like I had two friends and they hated each other, and I would just have to like ping pong between the two and figure out
Fun.
their emotional bullshit. But I remember like very fondly, one of them was reading the series with me, so we would like call on our corded phones and talk about the latest book. So like I remember that being a thing.
That's
And
cool.
I mean, the last one sort of released when I was a bit too old for them, I would say. So in my early high school years, we got like the last two of them, but we were like, we're gonna read it because we've read it all through primary school, so we're gonna continue doing it, and we kept like that relationship up. And ironically, I found her recently on Bookstagram, and I
Oh,
was like,
nice.
"Wait, are you this person?" And you're like, "Are you this person?" And we're like, "Yeah." So we've ended up like
Wow.
coming together again in like this weird circle of events.
That's cool.
So it's kind of interesting. Although she reads a lot of SJ Mass, which we've already like shat on in this podcast.
I was
So,
gonna say, I bet I can guess what. Yeah.
definitely more on the romantic fantasy era, but that's fine. And my game for this is Banjo Kazooie and Banjo
Nice.
Tooie.
Classic.
Yeah, so that's the Nintendo 64. I remember my dad being gifted the Nintendo 64. So he would have only been, I mean, he was 19 when I was born, so he was in his early 20s when it came out. And I remember my mum was going to Maui for work. I don't know how old I would have been, but I've been wanting it. We didn't have a lot of money, and she bought the second game for me, so Banjo Tooie from Duty Free. And like she presented it to me when she came back, and she would have had to save for it. And you realize that now
Yeah.
when you're an adult and you have to save for things. As a kid,
Mm.
it's like, oh, why can't I just have this thing?
Yeah,
Um,
my friends have got it.
yeah,
Why can't I have it? Yeah.
why can't I have it? And yeah, so Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie will forever hold a very special place in
Yeah,
uh,
wow.
in my soul. But yeah,
That
that
is
was
that
a
is
good
awesome,
one.
man. It's funny just talking about that age difference, right? So for you it was the 64. For me it was the SNES when I
Yeah,
was like so
yeah.
at this age. But then my cousins who slightly younger than you, about I think 7 to 9 years. So I've got two cousins on my mum's side of the family, about 7 years difference, and then 9 years difference. And for them, it was the 64. So we got the snares of the 64, and then my games got handed down to them. So they kind of share that, around the same age as you, and it's just cool to have that and to see kind of like that difference, and just 5 years, 6 years, 7 years difference, and how it changes everything. But for what it's worth, my mum was obsessed with with Banjo because it was her favorite
Who is
game.
it? We
It's
recently
great.
played it as a family, like a family unit in the house, because the whatever Xbox's streaming is, they had the two
Live
games.
something.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
we ended up playing Banjo Kazooie together, and it would just be like,
Nice.
oh, I died, next person,
Yep.
play
Old
until
school.
death. Yeah, so that was
That is
fun.
cool.
And it's like I
That
just
is cool.
like you can play it with my eyes closed at this point, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember being
Yeah.
a little dragon in the second one. One of the last episodes, you got to be a little dragon. I was like, hell yeah, I can be a dragon.
Dragon,
Yeah.
amazing. I don't remember that. Yeah, was that Tui or was
That
that
was
the first one?
2E, yeah.
Yeah, cool. I
So
didn't play.
Tui was they got a little bit more experimental with the things that you could turn into in every level. So there's like a dinosaur and
Nice.
a truck
Yeah,
and like now that
cool.
you think about it, it's like, God, I was such a boy
Yeah,
throughout my
ding.
entire
Now it makes
childhood.
sense.
Yeah. Anyway, that was
Amazing.
fun.
Quick question before we move along, just because you mentioned Homeward Bound. Did you? You might have been a bit young for this. Did you watch Milo and Otis?
No, I was too. I
Ah,
missed. I
yeah,
like I have seen it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I
Cool.
think I missed the Milo Notice.
Yeah, because that was my sort of animal movie as a
Yeah.
kid. It was that, and then my cousins, it was Homeward Bound. So that's cool. All right, moving on.
Do you want me to go
Chugging
first this
along.
time?
I think yeah. I think
Okay, we'll
let's
switch it
alternate
up.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
So this time period is early adolescence, so which I put down as like late primary school, or I guess what high school is now, which is grade 7, so I'd say 12, 12 and up through to, I put adolescence as late high school, so for me it was like, I don't know, 12 to 16 for this one. My book was a series for this. This is when I got quite into reading in high school, and it was because I went to a high school where I didn't have any of my primary school people come. Like I was by myself, and this was Animorphs. So
Nice.
and you'll see comparisons if you read my book and you read Animorphs because it's such a big influence on. And like then I transitioned. I was like, oh yeah, I was really gravitated towards kids changing into different things. Oh,
Literal
how
transitions.
interesting. Anyway, like,
Yeah.
but I remember being devastated about Tobias. If you know, you know. And I just didn't. I've still never gotten over it. So basically, if you stay too long in animal form, I think it was like over 2 hours or something, you are forever that animal. You couldn't go back.
Oh,
And
wow.
Tobias was a hawk from like book one. He just paid the consequences. And it was like aliens, there was animals. I remember book four, I want to say, which everyone was turning into a dolphin. And like, but like the logic of animals' capabilities weren't there. So like they were underwater for 2 hours, and I'm like, hang on, dolphins can't breathe. No. Anyway,
Whoopsie daisy.
and like each book would have a different, and there was a show as well. But I remember the books more vividly,
Yeah.
which is just story of my life. But I remember like each book would have a different character that you followed, and they turned into a different animal. So yeah, I was very very fond memories of animals. And then I think I watched the show, and I was like, it's not as cool as this show in my head. So I'm just gonna keep doing it.
Which is a continuous theme in your life.
Yeah. I mean, I live and breathe books. The game. So this is interesting. This is a time period where my sister was old enough to start gaming, and my parents are old enough to tell me to shut up and do what my sister was doing. So our like interests sort of started to align a little bit more, or at least in this capacity. So we would do stuff together and fight over the things we were doing together. So
Naturally.
Simpsons Hit and Run was the one for this
Yes.
time period because it was something we could play together. I think she was more obsessed with it than I was. I remember her being quite obsessive with things and doing things a lot more. Whereas I've always been like, I've done this for 20 minutes, like I gotta do something else. But yeah, I remember Hit and Run a lot, and I think we had like a pirated copy of it on the Xbox from like my uncle pirated it back in the day, and it was just like the constant that was on there. Because games are expensive. They're expensive now. They're
Yeah,
expensive then.
they always
And
have been.
so yeah, that was the one we'd always play.
It's a classic.
My show, and this is what I laughed at yesterday. Throughout this
Uh-oh.
time period of my life,
Buckle in, kids.
was Neighbours.
I mean, I should have guessed that really
I'm
from our conversation in the
so
other episode.
embarrassed. That I was
Neighbours.
thinking in my brain. I was like, all right, what stood out to me? What was a thing that I gravitated towards? But we didn't get a lot of TV time, so I think my dad was like, "Go outside, literally, go and do something. Don't sit in front of the TV all the time." So we would get time periods, and the time period was like 6 till 7 p.m., and we could watch TV. So it was Neighbours and then The Simpsons, and like I was so engrossed in this stupid Australian soap opera. I was so invested. This was around the time that like puberty started to hit, so I started getting crushes, and I loved both Rachel and Zeke, and they were brother and sister, and that was weird. But I was like, they're both really cute. Anyway, again, foreshadowing for bisexuality in my adult years, which I had no idea was a thing. like, and I still have a crush
Amazing.
on Caitlin Stacey to this day.
I have no idea who these people
You would.
are.
I feel like if you Google Caitlin Stacey, you would know who she is. She's
Maybe.
done quite a bit.
In our household, it was like I didn't watch it, but it was Home and Away rather than Neighbours. So Neighbours, whenever it comes up in
Boo,
conversation, I just have no idea.
Buddha Home and Away. I think you pick
Who are
one.
all of them?
You pick
Yeah,
one as
yeah,
as whatever. Like you're either team Home and Away, you're team Neighbours, and I was
yeah.
definitely team Neighbours. I bonded with an English teacher over it, and I was like, again, also very telling for queerness, like future queerness, bonding with the
That's
English teacher.
classic. That's as stereotypical as it possibly gets.
Uh,
Amazing. Well, yeah. That's look. I should, like I said, I should have picked that. I should have seen that coming, but didn't. So thanks for that. Oh boy. Okay. This is where I cheated a little bit. I actually have.
12.
Uh,
I feel like this is where you start
almost.
making like real memories,
Yeah,
though, right? Like you start actually remembering a
absolutely.
lot. Yeah.
So I realized by doing this little exercise, this was quite fun. I actually realized this is where a lot of this aesthetics and the style that I kind of like today really came from. It was at this point in my life, and I'm gonna say mostly like grade 4 to grade 6, so pretty early, right? And my what I actually like and the things that I choose now are still very much connected to this. So this is when I really started getting into science fiction, like big time. And part of it was because my family, my dad, in his work, he got relocated to a smaller mining town about 600 k's from Perth, Kalgoorlie, and we lived there for 4 years. So this was basically the last half of my primary school years, and because of that, like there wasn't a lot to do, and so mostly it was just me finding things and finding my own ways to stay amused. And so there was really two standout things that happened. One is time spent in the bookstore, so
Yeah,
browsing
nice.
for books, and then watching TV. And we had basically two channels on the TV, and every now and then you'd get a really good show that would come on. And then there was like the video store that we would hire stuff from as well. So this is where I discovered John Marsden, And because
Yeah,
we were just
I had a feeling this was coming.
yeah, you knew it was coming. We were just at the bookstore one day. It was Angus and Robertson, if you remember them. We had one nice bookstore that we went to, and I just found his books. They were just on the shelf, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And I picked it up, and that was it for me. I was sold, and I would get every new book that would come out. I think there was probably about 3 or 4 books that were out at that point, so it wasn't from the very beginning of the series. But in case anyone's not aware, John Marsden is a beloved young adult and children's author. He recently passed away, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really sad. But anyway, he was a fantastic author and just person in general. He was the principal of he made his own school, created his own school, started a school, and anyway, he's done a lot of things. But the Tomorrow series in particular was a really beloved series about a group of teenagers that go on like a camping trip into what they call hell, which they have to like descend these big giant boulders to get into this place. So it was kind of a bit out the way. And then Australia gets invaded by people from another country. It's never really specified who. And they realise that when they leave and go and sort of, back to their homes and stuff. And they've got to decide, do we run? Do we fight? And it's basically them as like guerrilla, this little group that are, doing what they can to stay alive and fight. This is really great. And obviously TV shows and movies that have happened since then.
Caitlin Stacey was in that movie.
Ah, there you go. Okay, cool.
She played
makes sense now.
I can't remember.
Ellie.
The main, the
yeah.
main chick.
Yep. So that was the main book series for me. A quick honourable mention, though, just because it was also really good and important, was The Last Vampire series by Christopher Pike. These books still hold up today. So if anyone is ever looking for some young adult books, both of these series still great to this day. Still really good. That was a bit darker, of course.
I mean, I read Tomorrow When the War Began, well, not long ago. I didn't realize it was like 15 books, but I read the first one not long ago, a couple of years ago, and yeah, it does hold up.
Yeah, it's really good. It's very I think the reason I fell in love with him is because the way he writes is just very down to earth, just really just realistic. He's really good at different points of view and just getting into the point of view of the character. And he just wrote Ellie like she was a real person. Like you couldn't really tell the difference. It was just great. So anyway, so they were the main books for me. But then for TV, okay, so there are 4 different TV shows. I'm not going to get into each of them, but I will mention them because they were all equally as important and informed my childhood and the rest of my life, honestly. So the first one, Xena Warrior Princess.
I think we've spoken about that one before.
We've spoken about it, the definitive queer show.
I was going to say,
yeah.
Could we get more stereotypical?
Yep, no, it's hindsight's a bitch, right? So... all the pieces fall into place now. Anyway, it was what's I think the standout for me then was because I think I would have been in like grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, so from there. But I remember it was like right at the end of primary school for me because my parents went on a trip and I stayed at my grandparents and I was just watching this constantly. But it was really interesting how like I recognized the subtext in it even then, even though I couldn't put a word to what that was. It was something you notice. Kids get it. Kids know. there's no doubt. And it got really dark, and I really liked the dark and grittiness as well.
It's all of us that are like just idiots, and then like I don't know, when we're in therapy 10 years later, we're like, oh, that thing, yeah, right.
Ding!
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a freaking bomb that drops. Yeah. But this is where, so going through these other ones, just real quick, this is where I started recognizing I really like very kind of gritty, moody, realistic kind of stories, which I still do to this day. I'm not really into the fantasy side of things, magic systems, things like that. Not really my jam. I like sort of the realistic stuff and any kind of grittiness as well, which is why I love, a lot of like, we'll talk about it in a minute, some of the cyberpunk shows and stuff that I love. But there was 3 other shows, so one being The X-Files, big one. My parents used to watch that one too. The other one being Star Trek, Deep Space Nine in particular. But the one that I do want to mention is a show called Earth 2 from '94. It's not very well known. I don't think it's very universally liked either, but it was basically it's a single series. I think it got cancelled. Big surprise. It's a sci-fi show where they basically have this group of explorers. They leave Earth and they find a new Earth to settle on, and and start their families and things like that. And all of the characters kind of have something to hide, or there's more information that they're not, giving up. And there's all this corporate political stuff going on in the background. And then there's actually some other beings on this planet. They're not alone, and chaos ensues. It was really good, and well, for my like 10-year-old brain, it was really good. But I actually,
Subjective to
it's,
age at this point.
yeah. Look, it's not terrible though because I did actually find I do have the DVD box set that I got years and years later, and I rewatched it. It actually still holds up to a point because none of the ideas that are in this show are new. They're ideas that you've seen in sci-fi from,
Yeah, yeah.
probably like the 30s and 40s, really. But when you put them all together, it was an entertaining show, and I like some of the ideas as a kid, and they've informed a lot of the stuff that I like now. So yeah, I just thought it was worth a mention. So Earth 2, if you haven't ever seen it, if you like sci-fi, probably worth checking out.
Do you have a game?
No, because I had too many other things.
Okay, right. Okay.
I'm sure I could have found one because I mean, look, my whole family we were playing games at that point. It would have been PlayStation for me at that point, 64 and PlayStation. But there probably too many to name.
That's where our interests differed, and you went Sony, and I went Microsoft.
We were just playing all of them, to be honest. We had, yeah, it's a big gamer family.
All right, so adolescence, a time that everyone loves in their life, a time when
Ooh.
things became real clear for me in my brain that something wasn't going on.
Oh yeah.
And then I waited like 15 years, 10, 15 years to figure that out. So that was fun. So I'll go again this time and then we'll switch back to you for the
Yes.
second two. I've been hiding the books, like the prompts. Sorry,
Ah,
the
nice.
props down here. So the book that I've got for adolescence, which is late high school, is Lord of the Flies by William
Wow.
Gibson. So this is the point for me, really solidified my love of survival, just pure human survival, our ability to adapt, our ability to fight for other humans, but at the forefront ourselves, because this is dark shit. And I think I read this when I was 13, 14, and
Wow.
it is rough, but brilliant, and it holds up today. Like it is still a brilliant book. In my subjective opinion, for something that I loved, and yeah, so I didn't mention it in the last time I did this tag, and I sort of regretted it because it was something that really, with Hatchet by Gary Paulson and Z for Zachariah, I can't remember who the author was, but like it was the trilogy, like the three of those books was like just very deeply embedded in human survival. We have children cannibals in this book because that's what they have to do to survive,
Yeah.
and like it's just you do what you have to do, and yeah, really solidified that. Like I love that. I love the what pushes someone to do something extreme for their survival. And another theme that you'll find if you go and read anything that I put out, because I think it'll be a running theme throughout everything. Now, also in this period of my life, I discovered depression. Just because of all the things that were happening in my brain. But it was also the first time I got obsessed with a TV show, which was Charmed. So I
I was
feel
waiting for
like,
it.
yeah, look, I feel like people go down Charmed or Buffy route if you're interested in that sort of, genre, urban fantasy, or I guess you would call it urban fantasy because witches. And I just remember being obsessed with witches. I was like, yes, homie. If I don't want to be a girl, I'm gonna be a witch. Like that's what's gonna happen. Like I've got the tattoo. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, here we go. I was like, I'm trying not to like derobe. But yeah, I've got the tattoo of the
Nice.
triquetra, and yeah, I just remember being like, yeah, girl power. But then Rachel and I watched it together before we started The Resident, and like, it's problematic. It is not
Really?
held up well. um, in terms of, I guess, just and I mean, we're seeing a lot of, we're not going to get into politics, but like the American ideals. And I know that, and I really appreciate that the actresses were fighting for female rights while
Mm.
they were doing this. And they were like, no, I'm not doing that. This is too male gazy. This is written for women. We're going to take back female empowerment. And, I was a young girl at the time and I really appreciated that. And hearing them talk about it now, 20, 30 years on from the show, it's like, no, they were fighting their hardest to fight against the patriarchy that is Hollywood at the moment, or like producing these shows. But we were watching it now, and we are like, there's so much stock in having a relationship with a man, and like putting all of all of your being into holding a relationship. It's like it's not that important. But
Yeah, it's
then,
like
yeah,
that was your whole purpose.
that's your whole purpose in life is to go and get married. It's like,
It's
no,
absurd.
it's not. But yeah, like I just remember being super obsessed with Charmed. I still am. Who are we kidding? I will never watch the new one. It's
Wait, there's a new one?
Yeah, it's 2018. They tried to revamp it with new
Wow.
characters, and I was like, no, I absolutely refuse. I want
No.
terrible CGI. Um, I will never
That's part
watch
of it,
the new
yeah.
one. Yeah, 100%.
It's part of its charm. Hey.
And the game, this is firmly in my Sims era, so I put The Sims here, late high school.
Nice.
So I'm they've just re-released Sims 1 for the 25th anniversary, which really hit me in the age. I was like, I remember
I'm how
I
old?
yeah, I remember like waiting and saving up my pennies from pocket money to get the
Yeah.
next expansion packs, and now I can buy all of
Yeah.
them for $25. Rude. Um, but like
Amazing.
the anytime you hear the music, it just thrown back into, oh, I don't know, I was
Yeah.
like 12, 13, or whatever when I discovered it. But I was very Sims 1, like I was there when it released. And then Sims 2 was probably where I spent a lot of time over that time period, um, creating boys and being a boy. Again, I had no idea what was going on there. But yeah, it's definitely my Sims era in adolescence.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. I completely forgot about The Sims. It probably would have been on my list, perhaps, but yeah, that was absolute classic. And did you have friends who were playing it at the time, or did you
Oh
just pick it
yeah,
out because
no,
yeah, yeah,
100%. It
yeah.
was it was it was the thing. It was the game. It was the game to be
Interesting.
playing at that point.
Because I don't think not that I had many friends who were kidding, but like I don't think I really knew anyone else who was into it in that way or gaming in general. Just none of my friends really were gamers at all. So I'm wondering if that's part of the age difference as well, or
Mm,
just the people I was hanging out with, or who knows. It's cool. Awesome memories. Well, look,
adolescence.
yeah. Look, similarly, same thing. This is basically, and I think it's a lot of people's where you start to understand yourself a bit more, or be more confused, or both at the same time. So this was also like the lowest, and this was actually the lowest and darkest point in my life. So everything beyond this, much better,
Oh yeah,
but especially,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
actually, no. Young adulthood probably sucked for me the most. Sorry, but we're talking about you now.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for me it was this, and I think part of that was because I met my partner Steph really young. I was 20 when we met, and so everything was just up from there. That was great. But from about 14, 15 to maybe 18, um, that was probably, or maybe about 17, I guess. So end of high school, so the middle to end of high school, it was not the most fun time as it is for a lot of people. But I was just thinking because for you, like you had a really good book that was a big impact on you. I didn't really have that, and I think at this point, I didn't like any of my teachers in school. No one was teaching me anything. None of my, especially my English teacher, was an absolute bitch. Like she was awful, and everyone hated her guts. Like she was just mean, And I think it's kind of sucked that I didn't have any really good teachers to say, "Hey, have you read this book?" or to offer me a book because I think that would have changed a lot of things. I think if you've got those people in your life, it makes quite an impact. But I also left school really early. Like I left school after year 11. I didn't actually finish school because a bunch of stuff. So this for me, like what I remember about this period in my life was just being super depressed and then playing a whole bunch of video games. This was when I got into online games. So I actually found my friend group
Oh
online, and
yeah.
that was when I was playing Neverwinter Nights, and then later Star Wars Galaxies. So those two were the big standouts for me. But even with Neverwinter Nights, it wasn't like the single player campaign that I was playing. It was the like creating our own campaigns with
Yeah.
the tool set that you get, and yeah, and role playing and just finding my friends that way. So those were like, I mean, I would spend hours and hours and hours in front of the computer just playing these games. And then yeah, Star Wars Galaxies was a huge one because like not only was it like at that time in my life that I needed that, but also that game, like I've talked about it before, but there was nothing like it. It was just one of those games that was way ahead of its time. It was an MMO, but you could make your own towns and stuff. We've talked about that before on the episode on a previous episode. But yeah, it was just a great game as well. So I'm glad I found that and sort of had that in my life. But yeah, don't have any books to add because I just wasn't reading for years, throughout that. After I think finishing the Tomorrow series, or I think there was the Ellie Chronicles coming out
Yeah.
after that. So I did read those, but that was about it. But I do have a TV show that I do want to mention because it doesn't get mentioned enough, and I don't think I've talked about it here before, which is Farscape. I don't know if you've ever
I
heard of this one
was
or seen it.
yes, I have. I was so scared you were going to say Firefly, which I hate.
It was on the list.
No.
I thought I would.
No.
I'd spare you.
Farscape I have heard of, but I've not watched, so I don't have any opinions on it.
So this show, it was an Australian American collaboration, created by Rockney S. O'Bannon, who you might know from Sequest. He created Sequest ESV. and a bunch of other things. But this is, I guess, what he's remembered for or known for. And it was also produced by the Jim Henson Company, so it had a lot of like the physical kind of effects and things and puppetry and stuff like that. So it was visually very different, but also thematically very different because you had a lot of, it was very much found family vibes. So obviously, gravitated towards that. But again, kind of continuing this fascination with sort of rebels and outcasts and, people that don't have a place that kind of need to make their own place. And it basically is a story that follows this group of misfits that all sort of come together and they're living aboard this a living ship called Moya. So the ship is alive. And they find themselves in all these different situations. But all the while, you've got this character, John Crichton, who's trying to find his way home because he basically finds himself in this part of the galaxy because his spacecraft has this mishap and he's like hurtled across the galaxy. But I had this massive crush on Erin Sun, who was played by Claudia Black. And still, who am I kidding? Still have a huge crush. She's amazing. She is just amazing at her craft and just an amazing person. But yeah, it was a freaking weird show, and I loved the weirdness, and I still love the weirdness. And if you haven't seen it, go watch this show. It's so good. There's 4 seasons and a movie.
I'm still getting through The Resident, okay? It's taken me like 8 months. So to finish a 6-season show.
I'm actually really curious what you'd think of this one because it's like, if for someone who doesn't do a lot of sci-fi, it's sci-fi, but it's also just weird and silly. I have a feeling you wouldn't like the campiness. I think it's a bit too campy for your taste.
I don't like it. I've never liked anything like slightly humorous or nonsense. Like it must be serious at all times. I really want to watch Fringe. I mean, you reminded me of like wanting to watch Fringe.
Yes.
I think I've watched 2 episodes of it, but
hell yes, that was also on the list. I had to narrow down this list. Okay, it was a big list.
And then we should do an After Dark episode where we just like really rip into each other's favorite things.
Just go on a rant about neighbours.
I can go on. I will pop off on Firefly.
I'm sure.
Got it prepped.
I'm sure.
That was Adolescence.
Yeah, let's forget about Adolescence now. Move right along.
So that brings us, that brings us to young adulthood, which also like this is probably when things started clicking into place in my head a lot. I didn't make the connections during adolescence. I just knew I was very sad.
Yeah,
and confused about things, and then I got even more confused about things in young adulthood. And like even I'm looking at my adulthood show, which was a movie, and I was like, that was the turning point, like there.
Interesting.
So we'll get into it as we go. But it's time for you to start with your young adulthood.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so early 20s.
Early 20s.
So, yeah, cool. All right. So this is an interesting point because, like I said, I'd met Steph at this point, so I already kind of had figured out some things about myself and had moved in that direction, and that kind of stuff had already clicked into place, I suppose, or was in the process of it. But this was kind of where I discovered a lot of cyberpunk dystopian kind of stories and really started loving those. So you can see this kind of theme that's been happening where, these sort of rebels and outcasts, kind of obsession, is turning into like this cyberpunk, which is very much all about as well, similar to what you were saying, about sort of transformations, very much the same thing. Because in cyberpunk, a lot of the theme is like, modifying yourself or changing yourself, so
all those augments.
Yeah, augmentations, things like that. So it is kind of interesting in hindsight. So for me, this is when I got back into reading again, not in a huge way, but I did rediscover literature. And I found the book Neuromancer by William Gibson, and it changed everything for me. That was when I realized cyberpunk was actually a genre, and there was no
too excited when I bought that book.
Yes, it blew my mind. It was just, and I still think about it all the time. And I think I've reread it, bits and pieces of it once before. But yeah, I've never gone back and actually read the whole thing again, and I don't know if it would still hold up in the same way. I think it probably would, because a lot of it is just very much like aesthetics and like the themes as well. The augmentations, like you mentioned, and modifying yourself, but also like rebels and outcasts. So you've got like the hacker theme, and trying to survive and run from the authorities and things like that too, and then artificial intelligence and all of that. So all still quite relevant today as well. It's
getting more and more relevant, right? Like it's
Yep.
The world is weird right now. We were talking about this prior to the episode. Just it's a little bit fucked. Like
just a little bit fucked. Yeah.
a little bit fucked.
Oh man, but yeah, it's. I was reading the little. I'm gonna read the little blurb for Neuromancer just because it's super cool. So Henry Dorset Case was the sharpest data thief in the business until vengeful former employees crippled his nervous system. But now a new and very mysterious employer recruits him for a last chance run. The target, an unthinkably powerful artificial intelligence orbiting Earth in service of the sinister Tessia Ashpool business clan. With a dead man riding shotgun and Molly mirror-eyed street samurai to watch his back, Case embarks on an adventure that ups the ante on an entire genre of fiction. I mean, how awesome is that? I still love it so much. So that was a big one. Informed everything, and then leading right into the game that I mean, look, I came prepared today in my N7 shirt. It was the Mass Effect trilogy. You're all waiting for it. Well, I know you were, Chris. You were waiting for it.
I knew it was coming at some point.
Somewhere on the list. Yeah, I would have been like 22, 23 when I played this. I think the first one. I think so. Yeah, 22. And yeah, again, changed everything. So very much sort of taking those same kind of themes. But it was also where I sort of discovered that you could have sort of queer stories in science fiction. And I was like, oh, this is a thing, and obviously with Mass Effect, although there were those relationships that you could pursue, it was all about creating that for yourself as well. And like you are taking on that character. So obviously, that was a big deal for me. And Mass Effect's story, by the way, it's such a classic science fiction story. So like it's a story that you've probably read in some way before if you're someone who likes science fiction. But the way it does that's the thing that makes it special, I think, and the care that's been put into it, the world building and the characters. So yeah, that was game changing for me. And in similar vein, the TV show Battlestar Galactica, the remake from 2004 by Ronald D. Moore, again gritty, realistic space opera, military, sci-fi. Just, I mean, I was soaking it up. Are you getting it? I was soaking it up, and I loved it. Loved it so much. I still love it. That's a great show. Have you seen it?
I've watched 2 episodes because Rachel made me, and I was trying to impress her.
And you hated it?
No, I didn't hate it. I just couldn't sit still for that long. So
That's fair.
I ordered pizza. I was very focused
That's
on
your
eating
memory
pizza. Yeah. No, I was trying to like do the good boyfriend thing, and I was like, "No, show me your interest." And I was like, "I don't care. I just don't care."
Oh, and that's sweet.
But I think about rewatching it now that I'm a little bit more well versed in sci-fi.
Yeah.
But again, I prefer to read it. So I was like, if Mass Effect had a series of books, and I think there are books out,
Yeah.
I would probably read the books. But I
They're
just, yeah, I mean,
They're okay.
I've tried to play the first one, and I was like, I don't
That's
care.
fine. You're missing out. It's all right. It's
I've
fine.
watched Rachel play the second one. I think her big nostalgia is around the second one. So she's played that a few times through, but like it's super obsessive. It's like, I have to play 2 and then I have to play 3. All I know is a lot of people have the hots for Garrus, who's an alien dude. And I'm like, okay.
Calibrations.
Like,
You
I
won't,
don't get
you
it.
won't
I
get
don't
it.
get
It's fine.
nothing.
That's fine. If you know, you know. And honorable mention, I'll mention one just because it's fitting in. This one's nicely packaged in a whole theme. There's a whole theme going on. The film Blade Runner. So this is when I discovered Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And again, it's the cyberpunk theme. It's the rebels, outcasts. It's the whole thing. They all. This is like we're stacking. It's like a burger with layers here. So, anyway, so that's that was my young adulthood, and again that's still carried through. So that really hasn't changed. I think kind of figured out my style and what I liked, and still the same today.
My young adulthood wasn't bad, and like that was my teenage years really. Like I was very loved, and I just hadn't figured out myself. But my young adulthood, I got into a relationship when I was 18, and that was not great. Like it was mentally abusive, not physically abusive, mentally abusive. And there was a lot of stock in what I did and what I could say and what I could do and how I looked. And so for me, I only really started living post transition, or when I met Rachel, like when I met my person. And that was in the next category, but even then, it's like that was the turning point. It's sort of at the end of that adulthood. So young adulthood for me was quite interesting in terms of trying to start putting pieces together for myself within the confines of what my partner at the time would allow, or what I was doing. And it's just a very like things started twigging in my brain. And I remember just with the transgender thing, and this isn't to do anything with books or media, is I'd had that conversation with people before about, oh, I thought about transitioning or I thought about being a boy, but I was a lesbian and that's fine for me. And like, I just remember having those conversations really distinctly. But yeah, like a lot of my answers here are sort of that trying to branch out into self-discovery. So the book that I have here is one, and it's a genre that I don't like. I actively don't like. And it was a thriller romance called Die For Me by Karen Rose. And I read a lot of my parents' books basically around this time in my life because I didn't really know what my tastes were. And I would gravitate between dad's books, which was very like sort of Stephen King, Dean Koontz heavy, and my mum's books. And mum had this book, Die For Me by Karen Rose. And it's probably one that I've read 2 or 3 times. But I remember the main character was a archaeologist and a linguist. So she was able to translate into several different languages. And I just thought she was fascinating. And it was definitely like I didn't give a shit about the sex on the stairs or whatever like was happening in there. I was like, I just give me more of this person translating into several different languages and starting to put pieces together. And I this was the first time that I ever went to see an author in person. So Karen Rose ended up coming to like the Chermside Library and I took the book and I got it signed and that was the first sort of author interaction I had, which is why that's quite a special moment for me. But I did that with my partner at the time. And I was like, I didn't realize domestic thrillers were going to be my life. Fine, but whatever, here we are. Um, and then the TV show is probably the one that holds the most weight for me, and this is because I was identifying as a lesbian at the time, and there was a lot of, queer media started becoming a thing in my early 20s, but this is something that my family all watched together after I started seeing, I went to have dinner with my mum every Thursday, and then my sister started to come every Thursday, and then it just used to be a family dinner every Thursday, and we watched the Fosters together. Now, I have spoken about the Fosters here before, but so I identified as a lesbian at the time, and the two mothers were in a gay relationship, and they'd fostered kids from, various shitty situations. And I just remember that being quite a bonding moment. And then towards the end of that show, a trans male character came up and they had conversations about, I think it was a non-binary character and there's another trans mass character and they talked about top surgery and things like that. Didn't twig to me until much later, but I was like, that's really interesting. And I'm very curious about these people and having those conversations, which are quite hard for trans people to have, such as intimacy, physical intimacy as a trans person. And they were having those really deep and difficult conversations on the screen. So that really sort of sits with me as something that was the beginning of the end, really, for me being like, oh, that's the thing. That's what's been missing for the last 30 fucking years, like of my
Yeah, it was
existence.
all along.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the fact that we got to do it together was really nice. I also have really bad commitment issues with TV shows, so I never finish them. And I like left my parents hanging for the last 3 episodes. And there was one night we're like, sit down. We are watching the last three. We've done it as a family for 5 seasons. Sit down. But it was also one of those shows where my dad was like, I'm not really interested. And then would just like keep coming to watch it.
Nice,
And then by the end of it, he was
nice.
sitting down and we were there already to watch it as a family. But yeah, that was really nice.
It's cool.
And this is probably where I gamed the most. So this period of my life, I needed escapism and I didn't know why. But 2 franchises. So I have Fable, which is I bought the new Xbox purely for the fourth installment of this game. Like that's the nostalgia that it holds for me. And this is a fantasy-esque adventure RPG, but it's not open world. I would argue that it's the storyline is quite linear, but there is things that you can do in the wider world. But yeah, they're the only games besides the newer Tomb Raider trilogy that I've played multiple times and finished multiple times. The other one is Saints Row, which is just GTA on steroids and with zero logic or sense applied to it. The last one had like bouncy ball guns and aliens, and I was like, yeah, that's
Crazy.
that's
I
the
think we've talked about it off episode off the podcast, and I said to you I've never played a Saints Row game, and you're just like, yeah, it's exactly what you expect it
it's
to be. It's just
it's
nuts.
nuts. And like they tried to do like a really serious storyline for 1 and 2, and I've played 1 and 2 a couple of times, but then by the third one they were like, fuck it. And they just had fun, and the game developers just
Nice.
had fun, and it just it got mental. I mean, I've got the latest one I've played recently, but yeah, very
Very cool.
nostalgic over that time.
Nice. And the Fable games, was that like you played all of them? Or was it the
Yeah,
original
and I
one
played
or?
1 to 3. So
Yeah.
2 and 3 I came in at. One I played more recently because it released on Steam for the anniversary of it. So I picked up the first one and just sort of where the origin was.
Very
But
cool.
Fable 4 is meant to be coming out this year. And
Yeah, what's is that still a thing? It's still happening?
yeah, yeah, they delayed it. I think the developers were
Hmm.
like, it's not ready, and I'd rather take another year to. And I was
Fair.
like, I'd rather you take another year.
That's it, no
Give me
question.
a good game.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Nice. Yeah, I tried to play the Fable games. I do own them, I think, or at least some of them, and I get the appeal. Like they are pretty special. I think I came to them too late, or a bit too fantasy for me, perhaps.
So it's
But
not your genre, really, because I
yeah,
like being the. I've all like. If you did bad things, you would get scars and stuff. I think we've spoken about this before. Like you would get disfigured.
like Mass Effect.
Yeah, and I tried to play bad, and I just had such a moral compass that I was like, I felt so guilty that I couldn't. I just couldn't do
Yeah.
it.
But you can actually be properly bad because a
Oh
big
yeah,
thing
yeah,
about
hundred
Mass
percent.
Effect is like like you can do some pretty shitty things, like you can punch a reporter and stuff like that, but you're not really being you're just being a jerk. You're not really being evil. But I think in Fable you could be
You
pretty
can no,
pretty
you can.
evil.
You can be
Yeah,
like a dark lord. You could
yeah,
definitely play that either way.
that's
You know,
cool.
I was always and I always saved my dog because you got a chance of like saving everyone who'd ever died, and I was like, no,
Oh wow.
I want to save my dog that
Yeah,
perished.
dog's coming
Like,
back. Yeah, no,
yeah.
no way, no question.
And then the whoever the voiceover, she's a really famous actress who does a lot of vocal work, and I can't remember what her name is. She was in the
Don't know.
Penguin most recently, anyway. Um, she's like, I'm so disappointed that you didn't like resurrect the 10,000 people that died in this war. I was like, yeah, but I got my dog with those. So
Got the
what are you,
important
what are you gonna do
important
about
people.
it?
Yeah.
We're at the
So this
end.
is
We
yeah.
we're at the last one. We got there.
We got there. So adulthood, 25 plus, which is interesting because now I mean, I'm well into that now. I just
We've been there
feel
for many years now.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even like you lump it all together in one category, but also there's parts to that as well that there's for us it's like pre-transition, post-transition as well. But there were a few things, and for me also baked into this is I went to university pretty late, so I was like 27 when I went to uni as a mature age student at 27. Like, it seems so stupid now when I say it out loud. But
It's funny though because I did my masters in counselling, or I got half a masters in counselling a couple of years ago, and I felt like an mature age student, like with the 18-year-olds that were in there. And I
yeah,
was like,
they're so
oh,
young. They're just kids.
yeah.
Anyway, so this was when I was studying English literature and philosophy. So of course that kind of weaved its way in, and I really started to understand a lot of philosophical concepts that you hear about but don't really unpack very much. And I was doing a little bit of more figuring out where those ideas had come from and what those ideas actually were and what those arguments actually were all about. There were a lot of classics that I could have chosen for this. There were a lot of classic books that I'd read for the first time ever, and all of those pretty much are big, impactful moments, right? Because each of them has something. But I wanted to pick a book that wasn't on my syllabus. That one was one that I picked myself, which was Embassy Town by China Mieville, because this book kind of takes those things that I love and was learning about. Especially in this case, it's philosophical ideas about language and like specifically semiotics, and like there's all this stuff about when you point to something and you say, hey, that's a chair, you're sort of talking about the idea of the chair, not the actual chair, and so that you can both communicate on the thing. This book kind of pulls that all apart, and the aliens in this book are kind of like they mess with your ideas about what language and communication is. Basically, to summarize this book and what it's about, there's these aliens that have two mouths and they both speak in unison, and they don't have ideas of like there's no like language play in their language. Everything is literal. But if you want to take the idea of like a simile, you have to actually create like a person, and they become the idea of the simile, so that you can point to that person and say. So it's really bizarre what it does with language. But this was like the first time I'd seen stuff like this before and realized, oh, this is the stuff you can do with fiction. You can incorporate these ideas, these arguments that people have had about philosophical ideas for years and years, like thousands of years, and put them in a science fiction book. So of course, I loved that. It's a great book. I still one of my favorites to this day.
I was gonna say, is that your favorite China Mieville
Oh,
book?
well, I haven't read that many yet, right? But this
Okay.
is absolutely my favorite, and at least right now, and probably will be. But I do have a couple of, I think there's a couple other sci-fi leaning ones because some are very more like a lot more fantastical and more traditional fantasy or just weird fiction. This is probably the most sci-fi that he has. But yeah, but I'll let you know once I've once I've read some more. So that was the book that I loved and still think about all the time. And for TV show or movie, because it is both, is Ghost in the Shell, which is I sort of got into anime kind of late. I think I did watch like we all watched like Pokemon and whatever else was on, but I discovered in my adult years I discovered that there were all these really hardcore science fiction anime and manga, of course, as well. And my favorite was Ghost in the Shell, specifically a standalone complex, which is like the series. It's a fantastic action-packed, very cyberpunk, of course, very gritty, very it's all about hackers and kind of like AI and again transforming your body to become something else and all of this stuff. There's this running theme at this point, but
So we
it's so
know who
good.
we are now. Like,
That's it.
yeah.
That's it. I know what I like, and yeah, this one's right up there. Still my favorite to this day. And I rewatch it quite regularly as well. I'm not a big rewatcher or rereader, but this one, it's probably maybe every year or two I will dip in and rewatch it. So yeah, so that one was one that I still love and was a big impact on me. And for game, I didn't really know what to choose, to be honest. But one that I talk about a lot that I guess then has had a big impact on me is the Life is Strange series. I didn't want to pick just one. Again, because of I've realized you can actually, put queer stories and focus queer characters, but also not make the whole thing about that. That was possible, and if you give it enough attention, it can be really quite beautiful as well. And it can be a whole artwork in itself, not just a game that you play, but an experience that you can have and share. And all of them, I love every single one of these games. Like the series as a whole is fantastic. There's some that I think are better than others and stronger than others. But this also led to the spin-off game, the one that we've talked about briefly on the podcast, which is Tell Me Why, that has the Transmass character. And like years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. Just the fact that that exists is amazing.
What's the one that Elliot Page is producing?
Oh,
Life is
what's it
Strange?
called?
No, that's not the
No,
one.
what's it called? Two.
It's going to annoy
Anyway,
me
I'll
now
think of it
until
when you're talking about it. Yeah,
we figure it out.
that's a great game as well. That was a phenomenal game that I think doesn't get enough attention.
I feel like we've spoken about it on the podcast, and that's why it's in my brain.
I'll look it up and I'll blurt it out when you're talking probably.
Okay,
But
good,
it's
great.
yeah, that's
Oh, that's
another one
good.
to look out for sure. But yeah, anyway, so that's I could have chosen a whole bunch of things. They're the ones that I could think of off the top of my head and still think about all the time. So yeah, that's what I chose. But yeah, could have gone a whole bunch of different ways.
We have lived a bit more than our 25 years that the the adulthood
Yeah,
time frame encompasses. So this, I sort of went, this is a personal canon
Beyond
tag.
Two Souls. Sorry,
Yes, Beyond Two Souls. Thank
just
you.
had
It
to
was
get it
going to
right.
annoy me, like,
Yeah.
for the rest of my life until I knew. I took this one quite personal this time around, and this was the turning point for me. So, I got out of a not great relationship, and I got into a relationship with my now wife very quickly. She was the first romantic partner to show me any sort of give and take, and also, but there was a lot happening. So I believe I was 26, 27, and when that was happening. So this is sort of the time frame that I'm talking. So I'm gonna save the book till last because that's a bigger story, and go with so it was a movie and a game, and these were so quintessential to my mental health through the shittiest time period of my life when I started to figure stuff out, and I ended an 8-year relationship and I was getting into a new one, and my brain had no idea what was going on. So the movie for me is Atomic Blonde, which came out
Oh hell
in
yes.
2017. Now I can't watch this anymore because
Oh
of the
wow.
connotation of
Hmm.
what I have it. Now, I know in myself that if I'm, and like it still happens, depression still creeps up on sort of everyone once you've gone through it. But I know in myself that if I am having a couple of bad days, this is when I tend to watch movies. But during this time period, I was not sleeping. I was getting like 2, 3 hours of sleep a night. I was going to the gym at all hours. And I would watch Atomic Blonde, and I saw it in the cinema with my ex-partner, so it was a tie into it. And then once that relationship had ended, I would turn it off, put the DVD back in, and watch it again. And I'll just watch it on repeat. And like, I think maybe in 10 years' time, I'll watch it again and it will hold something for me. But it was just an
Mm,
escapism. I was
mm,
like, I need James McAvoy and Charlize Theron beating people up.
mm.
And
That was a
that's
fucking good,
it
good
was a
choice.
very good movie, and it still is a very good movie considering it's like 8 years old now.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I just it was just such a crutch for me
yeah.
during that time, and I don't rewatch stuff. But yeah, it's one of
Hmm.
those ones that I'm like I'm not ready to watch it again just because of how emotionally charged I was during that period. And the game is Stardew Valley, and I couldn't give this to anything else.
Of course.
So Stardew Valley was an escape for me in that relationship. I knew it was my crutch in the end of that relationship where I didn't want to be around my then partner anymore. And we were living together. We only survived living together for like 12 weeks. And I just didn't want to be around this person. I wasn't happy. I didn't know how to communicate that. So I sunk many, many hours into Stardew Valley. And it's kind of nice because I'm playing it again now with my family unit. So Rachel, Jim, my housemate, and I have a family farm. And the difference in emotional state between I need to farm blueberries or I'm going to have a breakdown to I'm farming blueberries because it's legitimately fun and this is what the game is designed to do.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting to, I guess, to discover and make different memories
I don't
on
know
that
why I
game.
thought Stardew Valley was a more recent thing.
It's been
Like,
around for ages.
well, for you in particular,
Yeah.
like because you played with Rachel and stuff, and I just assumed that was when you started playing it. I didn't really think to ask.
Oh no,
Yeah, wow.
I played the OG like when it
Yeah,
was
cool.
out and it was quite a small game. Concerned Ape has done so much with it since then. Although, dear Concerned Ape, make the haunted chocolatier. Like, stop giving us updates for Stardew Valley. We're done. But the book is, I guess, a similar trajectory to yours. Is that this is what all the other little pieces of my enjoyment in different storytelling is, and this is the one that encompasses all of that in one big epic tome. And I can't say too much about it because you're about to read it. That is The Stand by Stephen King.
Oh, damn. Okay,
So
cool.
yeah, this holds a lot of weight for me. This really solidified my love of slow burn storytelling where you are sitting with your characters, and arguably this could be 400 pages shorter. I'm not denying that. It's a 1300 page book. Does it need to be 1300 pages? No, this is the unabridged version. But I remember being like, I feel like I have lived a life with these characters in this dystopian world. And it's got dystopia, it's survival, it's human nature, it's that found family. And it's just, you just sit with these emotions. And it's so heavy while having that horror element that King does quite well. Now, I didn't hate the end of this. A lot of people do, so I'm curious to see how you go with it. But yeah, I think if this really just solidified my love of this type of story. So I'm
That's
very,
cool.
very interested in your thoughts, and we can probably have a whole discussion on it when you read it, because I remember it quite vividly. I reread it fairly recently in the last few years.
Yeah, that's interesting. That just adds a whole other layer to it now for me, knowing how
No
much that
pressure.
actually means to you. Yeah, no pressure.
Ends up hating it. Also, that's okay. I still hate Firefly. So,
I,
whoa.
I don't think I'll hate it. I think it'll. I think I'll feel how long it is. You know, like you said, slow burn, and I don't mind a slow burn either. Like I totally get that. I'm with you on that. But it just depends on what it is and how the purpose for it and the intention. So we'll see. But yeah, I feel like we'll probably have a pretty big discussion about that once I
I
finish
would
it.
love to listen to it on
Yeah,
an
right.
audiobook nowadays, but I don't have 60 hours. However long it is.
When you said it's one that you're about to read, my brain just kind of did a somersault. I was like, what am I reading that is really important to you? And that makes sense now.
And it's interesting because Stephen King's not my favorite writer. He isn't.
Yeah. No, that's
Like a lot of people put a lot of stock in his work. I'm like, some of them are shit, and we need to admit that. But yeah,
yeah,
that book was a
yeah.
lot. That was it. That was the longest video or longest podcast episode that we have recorded.
That's fun.
So thank you, Taylor, from Made Between
Yeah.
the Pages, for that.
Yeah.
Some deep dive and emotional turmoil. We love it. That is us for this episode. To watch the video of the podcast, head on over to Genre Blender Podcast on YouTube. Audio only versions are available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify in the podcast app of choice. You'll find the show notes in the description for each episode, so they'll be down below if you are interested. You can follow us on Genre Blender Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. We're still doing TikTok for clips of the show, or visit genreblenderpodcast.com for all our social media across the web. I think we're in the process of pulling back from some of the more problematic ones. So we'll update that as we go through. You can find me at a fictional escapist on YouTube, Instagram, and Blue Sky, and Ryan is over at ryan.floyd on Instagram or ryanfloyd.com on Blue Sky. No, yep,
Cool.
is that it?
Yep, you got it.
Okay,
That's,
got
I
it.
mean, look,
Neat.
social media right now, right?
It's all a kerfuffle, and we're all trying
It's
to
a mess.
figure it out right now. Yeah.
It's a mess. To all the world hoppers out there, we wish you safe travels, and we'll catch you in the next episode, which will be fan fiction, opening gateways for new authors. Until then, we'll take care, and we'll see you next time.
See ya. Bye.